Mega Man X4 is a fantastic game. It's one of the best X games, one of the best Mega Man games, probably one of the best video games, and one of my favorite games overall. And after the few playthroughs I did for this video, that opinion has not changed. But instead, some new feelings cropped up, and I've come to think that, despite how great this game is, it could have been just a little bit better. And today, I want to talk about the multitude of things this game gets right, and the small bits that could have been done better.
Mega Man X4.
Two things before we get started though. First, take a look at this graph. It shows how many of my viewers are subscribed. So if you could just scroll down and make sure you're subbed, that'd be great. It's free and does nothing but support the channel. Second, this is the 4th video of my X retrospective, and the 18th video of my Mega Man retrospective. I would love for you to go watch the previous 17 videos, but that's not happening and not necessary. At the least, either have a basic understanding of Mega Man or X, or watch one of the X videos. X4 is the first X game to release on 5th gen systems. Or well, X3 is the first I suppose, but no one counts it because it's literally a port of the SNES version. X4 meanwhile was built for the PS1 and takes advantage of it. I probably don't even have to say it, but just take a look at these beautiful sprites and backgrounds. X and Zero look so much more detailed, with many more frames in their animations. Look at the dash for instance. X1 has about 4 different sprites, while X4 has about 7. You might be thinking, wow, 3 extra sprites, what a deal breaker. And on paper it isn't. But when you actually play it, it gives you just a bit more of a tactile feel than the SNES games had. And to be clear, this is not to drag down the SNES games. They were fantastic for what they are and did an excellent job with their hardware. X4 just does what they did and did it better than they ever could. With the soundtrack, X3's PS1 OST just sounded like the SNES tracks but with higher quality synths. It still kinda felt like chiptunes. Maybe that's because the game still looks like an SNES game, or because I know this what the originals sound like, but that doesn't change the fact that I think X3's PS1 OST is only sorta good, while X4's is pretty darn good. Once more, it takes advantage of the PS1 hardware, and sometimes it does actually sound like they're using real instruments. Take a listen. X4 also has its own lyrical theme, There Must Exist Unbeatable Love. Personally, I mean it's alright. I like it enough. The game's cutscenes are a step up from the SNES games, doing things that can only be done on the PS1. Of course, there are still the regular old scenes that are just characters standing around while text boxes appear, and they are the most common ones, with mugshots appearing as well for some extra detail and emotions. However, for the really important scenes, anime FMVs instead tell the story, just as in Mega Man 8. I'm no expert on anime, so I can't really tell you if this animation was cutting edge, if it's just fine, or if it's absolutely awful. What I can tell you though, is that I think it looks great, and it adds depth and weight to these scenes. General announcing his decision to create a world only for Reploids could still be told if it was just a text box, but when we see the camera showing the different people watching the broadcast, the soldiers lined up listening to his every word, and General himself telling us this scene hits harder and means more than a simple text box could ever convey. However, I think there is one major elephant in the room you have to discuss when talking about X4's cutscenes. The awful English voice acting. I'm not going to go into too much detail. All of us already know that the voice acting sucks, and we know why it sucks. For a quick summary, the voice actors do not fit the characters they're playing, and the direction was so bad that no line fits. To be clear, I don't really think that's the fault of the voice actors, the directors, or anyone of that sort. I'm sure these people did the best they could with what they had. The blame would probably lie on the executives who gave them a small budget and a small time frame. Regardless of whose fault it is, however, What we're left with is probably some of the worst acting in a video game. Thankfully, there is a fix for this. Play the game in Japanese. This is what I did for the Mega Man 8 playthrough as well, and I could actually take these scenes seriously. Mainly because I don't speak Japanese and thus have no clue what the characters are saying, and most importantly, I don't know if the voice acting is bad. But I mean, I guess the voice acting is good if I could still feel the emotions and take the scene seriously despite not understanding the language. Special shout out to Ace Diaz for making this undub mod, which replaces the audio for the FMVs with the Japanese audio, adding subtitles, and also retranslating all the text in this game, and using a much more readable font. And while we're on the subject of versions of the game, X4 also got a Sega Saturn release. X3 did as well, but to my knowledge it was identical to the PS1 release but with this border around it. The Saturn version of X4 only has a few cosmetic changes. In the second half of the Sky Lagoon and in the volcano, slight heatwave effects were added to the background. The transparency effects on X and Zero's dashes were also removed in the Saturn version, instead just being solid blue and red. And the spotlights in the Memorial Hall were also screwed up and are just solid blocks of dithering. So the Saturn version is the worst version of the game, but still good. Well, unless the integer scaling and the XLC port bothers you that much, in which case the Saturn version is the second worst. You start a new game, and you're hit with a character select screen. X is still playable of course, but now Zero has been upgraded into a full playable character who shares X's campaign with some minor differences. I'll touch on Zero's gameplay differences later, but for now I'll go through both of their stories. In X's playthrough, we start with the cutscene with two Reploids speaking at a table. The yellow one, General, is listening to the other guy covered in shadow about how humans suck and Reploids should rule and live on their own. Gee, I wonder who that guy is. General basically just tells him to leave. Next thing, X is at Hunter HQ when he hears of an incident at the Sky Lagoon, and X needs to go off to investigate. And in Zero's playthrough, he has a dream where he's being told by some old guy to destroy him, before Zero wakes up to the alarm about the Sky Lagoon. In terms of gameplay, nothing has changed between the start of X3 and the start of X4. You still run, jump, shoot, and dash just the same. Well, dashing has 2 or 3 more frames of recovery, making it slightly slower than previously, but that's it. So, no real changes have been made, and this is perfectly fine. X is controlled perfectly since the beginning, so if you just do that, you're on the right track. Once you reach the city's power source, a fellow Maverick Hunter, Magma Dragoon, tells you that the power source was sabotaged and there's nothing we can do. Of course, if a massive city like this falls down, countless innocent lives will be lost, but there's nothing we can do besides head to the surface and inspect the rubble. And once you head down, well, it's about what you'd expect. Right before the boss in Zero's campaign, we see a girl named Iris, and she meets this giant dragon that took down the place. So you go off to fight the dragon, and it's a pretty easy fight. Once you're done with that, Colonel shows up and tells you that he's only here for his sister, who's Iris. But since he's here at all, people will think that he and his army were responsible for this attack. So X or Zero asks Colonel to come with him. Colonel doesn't and leaves, and that labels him and his army Mavericks. For a little bit of backstory, there's a group called the Repliforce, which is basically just a Reploid army. General, the guy we saw earlier, is the leader, and Colonel is the second in command. And so, once the Repliforce is labeled as Mavericks, General gives a speech and declares that they will create a world exclusively for Reploids, where they don't have to answer to humans. The Maverick Hunters view this as a coup d'etat, and X and Zero must go defeat 8 of their commanders and stop the coup. So, X4 is already telling a lot more story than the previous 3 games. X1 was simple, hardly having any dialogue at all, and with all of the story being in the lore and other material. X2 upped it by explaining it all in the game, introducing the X-Hunters and having an emotional hook with them bringing Zero back. X3 basically does the same thing, introducing Doppler and the Nightmare Police, especially with bringing back Vile. X4 goes for something different, with the Reploid army being our antagonists attempting to create a world for them, which doesn't sound too bad on paper. This gets even better when a few of these scenes are fully animated. However, for me personally, I'd say this game's story falls a bit flat. I think the big reason why is how all of these characters interact with each other and have history, and yet we know none of that. Take Colonel and Zero for instance. From the little dialogue the two have, we know that the both of them know each other, have a history together, and respect each other. That's it though. Show, don't tell is what should be done in a story, and yet their relationship isn't shown to us much. We're instead told that they have one, and that's all we go on. Because I don't know the relationship in any sort of detail, I really do not care about it. I care about X and Zero's relationship because we've seen it. Zero saved X in X1 and was pretty much the only guy on his side on that game, and he sacrificed himself for X at the end. X then defeated 3 powerful Reploids just to get him back in X2, and Zero has had his back for the whole of X3. And this is just mentioning what we've seen so far. We don't have any of this for the new characters in X4 though. Iris is another example. I mentioned her briefly a few paragraphs ago when talking about the Sky Lagoon. Would you be surprised that, despite her brief appearance, she is Zero's girlfriend? Just with her brother, her relationship with Zero isn't shown to us at all. We're told the two have feelings for each other, and that's it. They have little interaction beyond Iris asking Zero to stop fighting Colonel throughout the game, and Zero basically just says, "My duty as a Maverick Hunter is to stop them, so no Iris, I will not stop fighting." He basically just brushes her off and goes on anyway. In a way, I think this can also be applied to the new Reploid world that General wants to build. On paper that sounds kinda cool, a world just for this different race. It reminds me a lot of Genosha. However, Genosha is something I actually care for, while whatever world General wants to build is something I find cool in concept and couldn't care less about beyond that. Of course, this is slightly unfair. Genosha is something we have seen, and it's where a massive battle took place involving some of our favorite characters. However, I still feel like more could have been done with General's idea. His country doesn't even have a name, but beyond that, what would this country be like? Or is there simply nothing more to it beyond Reploids are separated? I guess the same could apply to Genosha, but at least there, we had cool and interesting characters that we like living there. So even if the place itself wasn't interesting, it still felt interesting regardless. General's country does not have that. Editing Zemshia here. One more reason Genosha is cooler and I care about it more is that we've seen mutants fight for their rights and prove that they are just like humans. Hell, in the very same episode where we visit Genosha, there's a news station visiting the X-Mansion, interviewing people like Beast and Cyclops to prove that humans and mutants are not so different. Reploids don't have this sort of background. A world only for Reploids has never been brought up before, at least to my memory. From what I remember, the closest I can think of is Sigma wanting to create a world where Reploids rule over humans, which is still pretty far from what General was doing. Basically, mutants have been doing their best to be accepted as part of humanity, so when we see a country where mutants live like humans and even be accepted by them, it's great. Reploids have never tried doing something like this, so when you write a storyline where they try to make their own country, you need to do a lot more than simply tell us that they're doing it. So, the story goes for something much grander than the previous 3 games, and although it doesn't quite hit the mark, I am glad to say that the gameplay and stages do. As I stated earlier, X controls the exact same as prior entries, so that's a step in the right direction automatically. It would mean nothing though if the stages weren't interesting and fun to play. Thankfully, X4 has some excellent stages, probably some of the best in franchise history. Biolaboratory is a stage that comes to mind as it starts with this neat spiral staircase. Yeah, this segment is pretty much a straight line with enemies raining down, but the visual is really great and it doesn't last a long time. Then you reach a teleporter and you get sent to a short yet fun and well-made platforming section. Once you're done with that, you have to start climbing vertically while Togarics shoot at you from the sides and Tendoroid RSs come down, so you need to dodge and have a little bit of patience. You've got to fight against a Tendoroid mini-boss, which is kinda easy but still interesting, as it destroys the limited platforms you have once there's an opening. This is also just the first section as X4 splits the stages in 2. Segment 2 has a part where most of the stage is crumbling, so you need to move quickly unless you want to fall. A heart tank is also located here, so you need to quickly wall kick off one of the crumbling platforms to grab it. Finally, there's a small elevator where massive Togarics are blocking your path, and you need to quickly destroy and dodge them. So yeah, this is a great stage that's always keeping you on your toes. Or take Air Force. Section 1 of the stage starts with you outside jumping between a bunch of airships while having to deal with massive plasma cannons, so you either need to take your time to wait for an opening to move, or quickly destroy them. You also get access to the Eagle Ride armor, which is basically just a Hawk Ride armor. There's also an interesting segment where a heart tank is on an airship, but there's a massive laser on top of it. So you gotta quickly jump onto the platform, grab the heart tank, and jump off before you fall to your death. It's pretty cool. Later on in Section 2, there's a section lined with spikes, and you'll notice a little opening at the top. It's normally impossible to get up there, but if you use Lightning Web and jump on the web, you can get up there and get access to the arm parts. Again, it's pretty rad. My favorite stage though is easily Cyberspace. The first section of the level is basically just time attack. You have an obstacle course and you need to get through it quickly. These 3 courses are expertly designed and require you to have a perfect understanding of X and Zero's physics and controls. Honestly, this stage is more like a Sonic level, which probably explains why I love it so much. If you beat the section fast enough, you get the S rank and you get a collectible, heart tank, sub tank, and the head parts. Section 2 isn't as good, but I still like it, with the cool gravity flipping gimmick. It's very short though. Oh, and before I forget, the marine base. Remember in X2's desert base, you could grab a ride chaser and use it throughout the level? Well, they basically made a full level around it instead of it being optional. Ride chaser levels get a fair amount of hate, and rightly so. But I honestly don't mind marine base that much. It's still the worst stage in X4, but I more think of it as, sure, I'll play this I guess, compared to, by Solaris, this is awful, or something like Central Circuit. Ride chaser levels are usually hated because you're moving at light speed while having obstacles that you can't see coming in time. And maybe I've just played this level so much that I've basically memorized it, but this isn't really an issue I have. Especially in the first section, there aren't many obstacles that seriously hinder you, and those that do have decent enough telegraphs. In the second section, it's a bit of a different story, as I can see newer players being caught off guard by something and dying. I'm not a new player though, so I really do not care. Getting the heart tank and sub tank in this stage was something that I used to have a lot of trouble with a few years ago, so I can understand the frustration on that level, but nowadays I can get them pretty easily. So overall, Marine Base is just fine. One of the better Ride Chaser levels in this series, but still X4's worst level if only because you aren't doing any of the fun platforming and shooting. Heart tanks and sub tanks are still in the game, and they function the exact same. However, there are two new sub tanks replacing the third and fourth ones from the previous games. In X4 you have the two regular sub tanks as well as the weapon tank and EX tank, both found in the snow base. For the EX tank you need to use the lightning web or Zero's double jump to get it, and it increases your default lives. See, when you get a game over you restart with 2 lives. With the EX tank you'll instead restart with 4 lives. I know, massive change. So yeah, the EX tank is pretty useless. This gets even worse when you realize that getting a game over isn't as penalizing as it was previously. Before, you get your password and get booted to the stage select. Now you instead respawn at the beginning of a section once you get a game over. Hell, you might be able to respawn right in front of the boss door. So game overs mean nothing now, making the EX tank mean even less than it normally would. The weapon tank is equally useless. It's basically a sub tank but for your weapon ammo, which sounds good on paper. You know, there hasn't really been a good way to refill weapon ammo in previous games, at least in the X games. Later classic games the W and M tanks, but anyway, you just had to grind for weapon ammo if you ran out and needed it. And if you're going through a playthrough of the game as No Armor X, this is a good addition. But it becomes useless when you play as Zero, since the only move he has that requires weapon ammo is Rakuhuha. Every other technique of his can be used at any time. As X, the weapon tank becomes useless once you grab the head parts, as once you grab it, you have infinite ammo for all your special weapons. Well, unless you charge the special weapon, then it consumes ammo. So yeah, both of the new sub-tanks are pretty useless. Honestly, I'd have just liked for them to keep the 4 they already had, but I do appreciate the devs attempting to change things up and add new things to the franchise. And in a way, I do like how there are only 2 regular sub-tanks, as it forces you to play more cautiously since you only have 3 health bars instead of 5. Beyond that, there's the 4th armor, and it's probably the best armor yet. The first part I got was the foot parts in the jungle, and they enable you to air dash and hover in midair. I'd say these foot parts are a bit better than the second armors, while still worse than the third armor since the vertical air dash was removed. I'm not too bothered by that though, since it's not like the stages in the game were made for the third armor's foot parts. There really isn't much of a reason to miss it. As for the new hover ability, it's kinda useless, but I did make some use of it during the final boss, so that's neat. The next armor piece I got was the head parts in cyberspace. As I said a few moments ago, it gives you infinite special weapon ammo, unless you're charging the special weapon. It only took them 3 games, but they finally made a head part that wasn't useless. A new problem, the head parts are now overpowered. Yeah, infinite special weapon ammo is kinda insane, and I don't think I need to tell you why. Not only that, but again, it renders the weapon tank useless for the one guy it could have been useful for. So while this is the best head part yet, it still isn't perfect. Next, there are the arm parts in the Air Force. This is interesting as there are 2 arm parts. The first is the one I did not grab, the stock charge part. You charge up and you get 4 small charge shots that you hold onto and fire whenever. I did not grab this one because I don't find it that useful. The only real pro of this arm part is that you don't have to hold down the shoot button, which isn't really an issue for me. The arm part I did grab though was the plasma charge shot. You charge up and have a massive charge shot that lingers once it hits the target. This is the one I grabbed, and I don't think it's hard to see why. It's a massive, so basically a guaranteed hit, and it'll continue to do damage once it first hits its target. That last part is a bit less effective on bosses due to their iframes, but it absolutely decimates regular enemies. Probably the best arm parts yet. As while the second armor's arm parts did deal a lot more damage, I'd say it was too overpowered. Finally, there are the body parts in the volcano, which I'd say are pretty good. Of course, there's a standard damage reduction as you take about 33% less damage than normal. However, the Giga Attack is back, and I'd say this one is a lot better than Giga Crash. The Nova Strike. The Nova Strike is X dashing forward and decimating anything in its path. This sounds really cool, but I'm gonna be real, I did not use this. I just forgot it existed. It takes a good bit to charge up, and by the time it has charged up, I'm too deep into a boss fight to remember. This is why the only footage I have was when I used the Ultimate Armor, which has infinite Nova Strikes. Speaking of which, the Ultimate Armor. In terms of design, it's incredible and the best so far. Editing Zemshia here. I forgot to mention the incredible new paint job it has on X Challenge. I can honestly see someone preferring it over the regular X4 armor. X8 and X6 also have their own versions of the Ultimate Armor, but they just aren't the same. You think that with a name and design like this, it'd be incredibly overpowered. Honestly, it kinda isn't. It's literally just the 4th armor, except you're forced to use the Plasma Charge Shot instead of the stock Charge Shot, and the Nova Strike has unlimited ammo. I really like this armor, and it's not as overpowered as you think it is. But since you can only get it via a cheat code, I don't like to think of it as the same league as the other armors. Overall, pretty cool. As for the bosses, they're the same as before. Bosses are pretty great when fought normally, and they're trivialized once you bring in their weakness. Honestly, by this point, I've got a feeling that the X series will just never create 8 perfect bosses. And to clarify, a perfect boss in my eyes is someone who is challenging without their weakness, and only slightly less challenging with their weakness. Think of Armor Armadillo, Launch Octopus, Bubble Crab, or Magna Centipede. I think the last thing for me to talk about before the endgame would be Zero. As I stated a while ago, he is now a full playable character with his own playstyle and a slightly different campaign. And I must say, Zero in X4 is a massive improvement over his X3 counterpart, and I'd say better than the Zero Project version. Zero no longer uses the Z-Buster and instead uses his lightsaber, the Z-Saber. Just with this simple change, Zero is in an entirely different league than X, as X will stay far away and blast enemies to pieces, while Zero gets up close and slashes enemies to pieces. You really have to change up the way you play and the way you think, as plenty of things you do as X just don't translate over to Zero, and he instead has his own ways of getting through stages and obstacles. Take cyberspace for instance. X can usually just use Soul Body to get through the Minotaurus, but Zero doesn't have that. Instead, you've got to quickly maneuver your way around them, or just take the hit and quickly move on. And speaking of that, Zero does not have any special weapons. Instead, he learns new techniques with his Z-Saber. This does an even better job at differentiating the two hunters and gives Zero even more unique ways to get through things. My favorite of Zero's technique would be Quenbu and Quenzon, which you get from Split Mushroom. With Quenbu, Zero gains the ability to double jump, something X simply does not have, making Zero more advantageous for platforming. And with Quenzon, Zero can spin in midair when attacking, enabling him to cover a wide area in the air and deal a lot of damage. There are also some other cool moves of his, like Rakuhuha, where Zero punches the ground and energy blasts spread away, dealing a good bit of damage. This is Zero's Giga Attack, and it's the only technique of his where he uses weapon energy. Ryuengin is another good move, as you hit up and the special attack button to do a flaming rise and slash, which actually has a pretty big hitbox. I usually made the mistake of getting so close that I take damage coming down after the move, but you can be a little farther away than you'd normally think since Zero does move a little when executing the move. Overall, Zero is a great new character, with very unique mechanics and techniques to differentiate himself from X, and I am very glad he became a mainstay of the series and franchise as a whole after this game. Finally, it's time for the endgame. The first stage is the spaceport, where the Repliforce is beginning the takeoff of their massive weapon, the final weapon. Here you fight Colonel for the second time as X and the first time as Zero. He's a very challenging boss, and I'd hope so. He teleports in near you, slashes at you, and either teleports out or dashes to a corner of the screen while being invincible. Once he does that, he might teleport out, or he'll do 3 big slashes that you gotta dodge. He's ferocious, dealing a lot of damage, moving fast and keeping you on your toes. You defeat him, and you move on to the final weapon itself. There are 2 stages in the final weapon. In the first stage there are 3 bosses. As X you fight Double at the end of the first section, and as Zero you fight Iris. Then you fight General at the end of the stage. I don't think I mentioned Double thus far, and that's because he does hardly anything in the story up until now. He poses as a rookie hunter to be X's navigator, but he only appeared in stage select and said nothing of value. He is then revealed to be a traitor working for Sigma, and alright, I guess. Usually when someone reveals themselves to be a traitor and they backstab you, you're meant to feel shocked and betrayed. When Double does it, I feel no emotion whatsoever because it's not like there was any build up to this, and it's not like I care about Double. He appeared, like, twice, and simply said, "I'm gonna help you," and then proceeded to do nothing. From a story and narrative perspective, Double being a traitor falls flat on its face, and it sucks. From a gameplay perspective, however, this is a pretty cool fight. Double is a lot bigger than X, and he moves around a lot, so you gotta quickly move around to dodge him. They usually lunge at you from across a room, so you'll need to move fast. It's a fun fight. Afterward, he basically says, "You're pretty gullible, X, lol," and you move on to the second section of the stage. For Zero, he instead fights Iris. I feel the exact same way about this fight as I do for the Double fight. Naturally, this should feel awful as Zero is fighting his own girlfriend, immediately after he has had to kill her brother. Instead, I do not care because I do not care about the relationship. So again, total failure in the narrative department. Gameplay wise, pretty good fight. Iris summons her own ride armor and you need to slash at it until the max number of floating mines are released. Once that happens, the core separates from the armor and that's the weak point you need to go for. Once you defeat Iris, you get probably one of the most infamous cutscenes in gaming, and it's for the wrong reasons.
Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
To be totally honest though, whenever I think of the scene, I think of Johnny Young Bosch's screen from Teppen? Not sure, but I think that mobile game nobody's played is where Johnny's version of the screen is from. And yeah, this scene is so infamous that all of Zero's voice actors, besides Jack Merluzzi, have done this scream at least once. And it goes without saying that Lucas Gilbertson's version of it and Johnny's versions of it are incredible.
No! This isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on! What am I fighting for? What am I fighting for?
After you defeat either of those two, you have a pretty cool platforming section that diverges into two paths. And you then have a fight with General. I really don't care for this fight much. General will usually stay in a corner and he shoots his fists out and you can use them as platforms to stand on. They move back and forth between General and the wall opposite him, and since the arena is massive, there's a good chunk of the time you're just standing there while General is off screen and you can't hit him. He also fires these circles that are something. They're usually easy to dodge, but when you get close to him you basically can't dodge them. And when you get close enough to hit General, you can usually get one attack in before his fists start flying away. Overall, I can't say that I hate General's fight, but I do not have fun fighting him. Once you defeat General, the final weapon starts moving towards the earth and it'll crash into it. General didn't do this, so it's up to the only guy left, Sigma. After this, we have the final castle stage. This stage contains the boss rush and the final fight against Sigma. In the X2 and X3 videos, I never mentioned the boss rush because I had nothing to say about them. They suck and are the worst parts of every Mega Man game, and it was kind of funny to just pretend they don't exist. In X4 though, something specific happened during the boss rush that I really did not like. In my Zero playthrough, I was going through the boss rush as normal, till I fought a Magma Dragoon. This fight is probably one of the best fights in the series, as he moves around a lot, attacks quickly and powerfully, and he requires you to pay attention and react perfectly. He's a difficult fight, and he's so difficult I had to use a sub-tank on him, thus bringing me down an entire sub-tank for the actual final fight against Sigma. Now, you'd think I can just refill it, but no. First, you can't exit the stage to go refill your sub-tank without having to redo the entire boss rush once you come back, since the boss rush and the fight against Sigma are in a singular stage. Secondly, there are hardly any life energies in the stage. There's a large one that comes back after you defeat a boss during the boss rush, but that fills up like 5% of the sub-tank, and Magma Dragoon was my last fight, so I only got one. There's an extra large life energy right before the Sigma fight, and I thought this one would fill your sub-tank all the way back up, because that's what it does to your health bar. It instead filled up about 10% of the sub-tank. So, because the boss rush and final boss are in the same stage, and because adequate healing items are non-existent in the final stage, I was down an entire sub-tank when I fought the final boss, after the game had already taken away 2 of them and given me other useless sub-tanks in their place. Yeah, I had a lot of fun fighting Sigma as Zero. Speaking of fighting Sigma as Zero, right before the fight, an FMV plays where we see a flashback to when Zero was first discovered. A group of Maverick hunters named Gamma's unit found an abandoned Reploid stashed away, and they awoke him. They were subsequently ripped to shreds by that Reploid. Commander Sigma was called in and he fought this Reploid. It's a hard fought battle and the two are pretty evenly matched. Zero eventually takes off Sigma's right arm and nearly kills him before a massive W appears on Zero's forehead gem, and Sigma takes the chance and strikes him unconscious. Then Zero is recovered and reprogrammed as a Maverick Hunter, while the Maverick virus transfers itself to Sigma. This is the first time we learn anything about Zero's past. We knew that X was created by Light and that Kane found him 100 years later, but we know nothing of Zero and who created him or anything of the sort. But this game lays the foundation for future games to tell us, with the flashback at the beginning of Zero's campaign obviously being Wily, that W on Zero's forehead gem also clearly being Wily, and Zero being a Maverick and being the original carrier of the Maverick virus. This must have been pretty shocking to learn for the first time, and it kinda was for me. For Zero though, he doesn't really care. He'd probably figured it out a while ago, and he says that he will defeat Sigma for all those who've died during the war. As for the final boss against Sigma himself, it's split up into about 3 phases. Phase 1 is against the Cloak Reaper Sigma. It's a very simple and kinda bad fight. He can only be damaged with his weakness, Rising Fire Ryu Engine, and he also has this move where he slashes across the entire ground with his scythe, and there isn't a way to dodge it. After that though, Sigma takes off the cloak and phase 2 begins. This is a much better fight as Sigma has a few attacks. First, Sigma usually jumps into the middle of the arena and swings his scythe around. His scythe has a massive hitbox, so it's kinda difficult to dodge, but Sigma himself is wide open. Then Sigma throws his scythe at you and it strikes onto whatever it hits and emits electrical charges onto that surface. If his scythe lands on the wall, then Sigma leaps to the other side of the arena and fires his laser eyes across the floor. This attack is tricky to deal with since I was too busy getting hit and trying to hit him to realize I could just kick onto the wall behind him and be fine. And if this scythe lands on the floor, Sigma ejects 4 boomerangs from his shoulder to chase after X and Zero, so you gotta run and dodge them. So Sigma has a good variety of attacks, all of which deal a lot of damage and force you to stay on your toes and be prepared for anything. I absolutely love it. Once that's done, the floor of the arena crumbles as you fall down. You reach Sigma's third and final form, split between 2 bodies, Earth Sigma and Gunner Sigma, along with 3 mini-bodies. This is my favorite phase, and I love this boss. You start with the mini-bodies. The red one shoots fire from the left, while the blue and yellow ones are on the right side of the arena. The trick here is to stay up on the floor, jump onto the blue/yellow mini-bodies, then wall kick all the way up. You'll dodge the flame shots easily. The yellow one will shoot 6 spheres of electricity which split into electrical bolts on the surface it touches. This one is the trickiest one for me as they have a massive hitbox. Just do your best to dodge. The blue one will breathe cold fog onto the floor, and this is the easiest to dodge, as you can kick up the red and yellow mini-bodies to stay away from the attack. The mini-bodies are pretty easy to dodge, and they provide a nice break from Sigma himself. As for Sigma, he has 2 bodies with different attack patterns. Earth Sigma is the easier of the 2 personally. He stays in the bottom left of the arena and attacks with his mouth. He has 2 attacks. The first attack has Sigma inhale debris, also pulling at X/Zero. He then spits out the debris in a random fashion, and you'll get hit by the falling debris a good bit. His second attack is the easier one, as he'll summon spikes on the right wall while creating heavy winds to push X/Zero. However, if you just dash, you'll stay in place and be just fine. Finally, there's Gunner Sigma, which is probably the harder one. He appears on the top right of the arena and has a massive gun that he shoots you with. He'll either fire a massive laser that sweeps across the entire floor, dodge by kicking onto the mini-bodies, or he'll fire a laser beam in X/Zero's direction. You can only aim at 3 specific angles, making the attack pretty easy to dodge. So these 2 variations of Sigma are pretty challenging, with the massive attacks that deal a lot of damage. But with patience and practice, you'll get the hang of it and defeat him. Once you defeat Sigma, General appears and tells X/Zero that he'll use his own body to stop the descent of the final weapon to save the Earth. X and Zero then take a shuttle back down to Earth as X calls Zero. X sees how many of the Reploids he knew turned Maverick and wonders if he could turn the same way.
なあゼロもし俺がイレギュラー化したらどうする
くだらないことを聞くんじゃないキゾ
待ってくれ真剣に聞きたいんだゼロもし俺がイレギュラー化したら君が処理してくれ
バカなこと言ってないでさっさと戻ってこい
約束だよゼロ
For Zero, this isn't the time to be asked questions like that. Zero just killed someone he loved dearly, and he can't bear to think of doing that to his best friend. X and Zero then return to the planet, ending Mega Man X4. Writing the script was an interesting one for me. When you hear about Mega Man X4, it's a game that's constantly touted as one of the best 2D platformers ever, right up there with the original Mega Man X. And I must agree with that. It is a fantastic game. But when I sat down and played the game again for this review, I found more cracks in it than I had before. X4 is no perfect game, but it's probably the closest the X series will get, and maybe the closest the Mega Man franchise will get to it. It gets a lot right, and the things that it gets wrong, all small and will pretty much matter to only Mega nerds like me. And even for me, they aren't enough to damage this fantastic game. X4 is easily an S-tier Mega Man game, and probably a top 10 or top 15 video game personally. But with all this said, I'll see you in the next video.